You ever notice how sometimes the loudest thing in a conversation is the thing you don't say? You've been there? Standing in the middle of an argument, your heart pounding, every part of you wanting to fire back to prove your point, to win. But deep down, you know that the more you push, the more you lose. Silence isn't about shutting down, and it's not about letting someone walk all over you. It's about choosing not to feed the fire. It's holding your ground without swinging a single punch. It's realizing that your peace is worth more than being right in that moment. And when you learn to stand in that quiet, that's when you win without fighting. Most of us carry battles no one else can see. They're not loud, they're not obvious, but they drain us all the same. It's the tension in a relationship that never seems to ease, the unspoken words that hang heavy in the air, the feeling that no matter what you say, it only makes things worse. You've tried explaining, you've tried defending yourself, you've tried meeting force with force, and all it's done is leave you more tired, more frustrated, more misunderstood. What I want to share with you today isn't about avoiding conflict or pretending it doesn't exist. It's about a different kind of strength, one that doesn't shout to be heard, one that knows how to protect your peace without letting the other person control the moment. There are moments in every relationship where you can feel the tension building like a storm. You see it in their face, you hear it in their tone, and your chest gets tight because you know where this is headed. Your instinct is to jump in, to fix it with an explanation, to defend yourself, or to correct what they just said. You're thinking, if I can just say this one thing the right way, they'll understand. But the truth is, in that moment, every word you add is like pouring more water into a bucket that's already overflowing. They can't hold it. And the more you talk, the less they can hear. It's not about whether you're right or wrong. It's about the fact that they're not in a place to receive it. When words only make it worse, it's usually because one or both of you is already running hot. The brain is in defense mode. You're not listening to understand, you're listening to respond. They're doing the same. Every sentence becomes fuel for the fire instead of water to cool it down. And even though you're trying to fix it, it starts to feel like you're digging the hole deeper. That's when you have to be honest with yourself and ask, am I helping right now, or am I just trying to win? It's a hard question because the answer sometimes stings. Here's the reality. Silence in that moment isn't weakness, and it's not giving up, it's wisdom. It's the choice to let the heat drop so that the conversation can actually go somewhere productive later. You can't have clarity in chaos. You can't build understanding in a moment where the other person feels threatened or unheard. And no matter how good your argument is, no matter how perfectly you think you're wording it, it will land wrong if the ground isn't ready. So what does it look like to handle this differently? It might mean you pause mid-sentence and take a breath. It might mean you say, I want to talk about this, but right now isn't the right time. And then you actually step back. That's not avoidance. That's leadership in the conversation. That's you deciding to be the thermostat instead of the thermometer, setting the tone instead of reacting to it. You're not letting them win. You're protecting the space so both of you have a chance to win later. And when you do come back to the conversation, you come back with a calmer voice, a clearer mind, and a willingness to actually hear them. You can share what you need to say without the bite, without the edge, without that defensive energy that makes the other person's walls shoot right back up. That's when your words actually have a chance to work. The real power here isn't in how well you argue, it's in how well you choose your moments. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop talking long enough for the air to clear. And in that quiet, you give both of you the gift of actually being heard when it matters. When someone knows you well, they know exactly where your buttons are. They know the topics, the tone, the little jabs that can get under your skin faster than anything else. And when those buttons get pushed, your body feels it before your brain can even catch up. Your shoulders tighten, your voice sharpens, and your patience starts to thin. You want to fire back, not just to defend yourself, but to prove that they can't get to you. The problem is, the second you react, you've given them the steering wheel. You've let them decide where the conversation goes and how you feel in that moment. Holding your peace isn't about pretending it doesn't bother you. It's about refusing to hand over control of your emotions to someone else. In those moments, it's easy to convince yourself that speaking up right now is strength, that if you don't respond immediately, you're letting them win. But the truth is, real strength is being able to stand there, take a slow breath, and not let their words dictate your next move. You're not ignoring the hurt or the frustration. You're choosing not to let it run the show. That takes more discipline than lashing out ever will, because anybody can be reactive. Anybody can snap back. But it takes a grounded, secure person to say, I'm not going to let you pull me into that space. Sometimes holding your peace means creating a pause between what they say and how you respond. It might mean you physically shift your body posture, look away for a moment, or even excuse yourself to reset. Those small acts of self-control are you reclaiming ownership over your emotional state. You're telling yourself, I decide how I show up here, not them. And that's not weakness, that's power. The kind of power that builds trust with yourself, because you learn over time that you can be steady even when someone else is trying to shake you. It's also important to remember that pushing your buttons doesn't always come from a place of malice. Sometimes it does. But sometimes it's their own defensiveness, their own pain, their own habits that make them throw words like darts. If you can remember that their reaction is about them, not about your worth, it becomes a lot easier to stay calm. You can see the bigger picture instead of getting trapped in the heat of the moment. That doesn't mean you let it slide forever. It means you choose the right time and the right tone to address it when you're in control, not when you're provoked. When you hold your peace in these moments, you send a quiet but clear message. You don't get to decide who I am right now. That kind of emotional steadiness changes relationships. It takes the fuel out of pointless arguments, it protects your dignity, and it gives you the space to actually respond in a way that moves things forward. And over time, you'll find that the more you protect your peace, the harder it is for anyone to take it from you. Arguments have a way of taking on a life of their own. What started as a simple disagreement can snowball into something bigger, louder, and messier than either of you intended. Before you know it, you're not even talking about the original issue anymore. You're pulling in old hurts, unrelated frustrations, and side comments that sting more than they help. And every time you add another defensive statement, another, yeah, but you're feeding that argument like tossing wood onto a fire. It burns hotter, it burns longer, and it leaves more damage behind. The hardest part is realizing that even when you're convinced you're making a valid point, the timing and tone can turn it into fuel instead of water. One of the biggest traps in an argument is the need to get the last word. That need comes from a place we don't always want to admit. Pride, fear of being misunderstood, the deep desire to be seen as right or fair. But here's the thing, in the middle of an argument, the other person isn't listening to your logic. They're hearing the emotion underneath it, and if that emotion is frustration, defensiveness, or sarcasm, that's what they respond to. You can have the best reasoning in the world, and it still won't land if the other person feels attacked. That's why one of the most powerful skills you can develop is knowing when to stop talking. Not as a way to shut down the conversation forever, but as a way to stop feeding something that's not going anywhere good. Stopping doesn't mean giving up your perspective. It means protecting it so it can be heard later in a calmer space. It's you saying, I know what I want to communicate, but I also know this isn't the moment it will be received. That requires self-awareness. It requires noticing when the conversation has shifted from solving a problem to just proving a point. And it requires courage, because it's not easy to let go of the urge to fight for your position in real time. But every time you step back instead of stepping in, you're taking control of the only thing you can truly control, yourself. There's a shift that happens when you stop feeding the argument. The heat starts to drop. The energy that was fueling the back and forth loses its grip. You create space, and space is where clarity lives. You might not resolve everything right away, but you keep it from getting worse. That's an underrated kind of victory. It can help to have a go-to phrase for these moments. Something simple like, let's talk about this when we're both calmer, or I want to finish this conversation, but not like this. Those words act like a release valve. They signal that you're not walking away forever, but you are walking away from the cycle that's keeping both of you stuck. Over time, that habit changes the way arguments play out. They stop dragging on for hours. They stop spiraling into places that hurt the relationship. When you stop feeding the argument, you give yourself and the other person a chance to step out of the fight and back into the relationship. And that's where real progress is made, not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet after it. Few things are more frustrating than trying to speak your heart and feeling like the other person just isn't hearing you. You repeat yourself. You try different words. You raise your voice a little, thinking maybe they'll get it if you make it clearer. But all that happens is you feel more drained, more unseen, and more disconnected. It's like you're knocking on a door that they've locked from the inside. In those moments, your instinct is to push harder, to force the conversation open. But the harder you push, the more they shut down, and the cycle just repeats. Staying calm when they won't listen isn't about giving up on what you need to say. It's about refusing to lose yourself in the process of trying to be heard. When someone's not listening, it's rarely about your words alone. There's usually something else in play: their emotions, their stress, their own walls they've built over time. Sometimes they're defensive because they feel blamed. Sometimes they're distracted by their own problems. And sometimes they're just not ready to face what you're bringing up. If you can remember that their lack of listening isn't automatically a reflection of your worth or your clarity, you can take some of the sting out of it. You can see it for what it is, a signal that the conversation isn't in the right place yet, rather than proof that you're powerless. The hardest part is not letting their lack of listening pull you into a place you don't want to be. Anger feels easier than patience. Sarcasm feels easier than grace. But when you let those emotions run the show, the focus shifts from the actual issue to the way you're reacting. Suddenly, you're defending your tone instead of your point, and what you needed to say gets lost in the noise. Staying calm is about keeping the focus where it belongs, on the heart of the matter, not the heat of the moment. Sometimes, the best way to keep your calm is to pause the conversation before it unravels. That might mean saying, "I want us to talk about this, but I don't feel like you're able to hear me right now," and stepping back for a while. It's not a retreat, it's a strategy. You're choosing to wait until the other person is in a place where your words have a chance to land. And that decision protects your peace. It keeps you from pouring all your emotional energy into a brick wall. Other times, it means quietly reminding yourself in the middle of the conversation, my job isn't to make them listen. It's to speak my truth calmly and clearly. You can't control their ears, but you can control your voice. And when you keep that voice steady, you send a message, not just to them, but to yourself, that you can be anchored even when the other person is drifting. Over time, that calm presence can shift the dynamic. People feel safer listening to someone who isn't attacking them. They open up more when they're not on the defensive. And even if the change doesn't happen right away, you'll know you didn't let their silence turn you into someone you're not. That's the quiet kind of strength that holds relationships together when words alone can't. There's a big difference between protecting your energy and shutting down. Shutting down is what happens when you feel so overwhelmed, hurt, or frustrated that you just pull the plug on the whole conversation. You stop engaging, maybe cross your arms, avoid eye contact, and retreat into silence as a way to protect yourself from feeling more pain. In the moment, it can feel like safety. But over time, shutting down builds walls so high that even the people who love you can't get through. Protecting your energy, on the other hand, is staying present without letting the other person drain you. It's choosing boundaries over barricades. The truth is, people will pull on your energy, sometimes without meaning to, sometimes without even realizing it. Maybe they bring you every complaint they have. Maybe every conversation turns into a debate. Or maybe they lean on you emotionally but never really pour anything back in. And if you're not intentional about it, you'll keep giving until you're running on fumes. Protecting your energy means learning to recognize when a conversation or dynamic is taking more from you than it's giving. It means noticing the moment when your shoulders tighten or your patience starts to disappear. And instead of pushing through it just to keep the peace, you take a step back. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care in a way that's sustainable. You can listen without absorbing every emotion they're feeling. You can be supportive without letting their storm pull you under. Sometimes that looks like saying, I hear you, but I'm not in the right headspace for this right now. Sometimes it's taking a break in the middle of a heated discussion so you can come back with a clearer mind. And sometimes it's deciding that certain topics or patterns aren't worth revisiting unless both people are willing to approach them differently. One of the most important things to understand is that protecting your energy isn't about changing them. It's about managing you. You can't make someone stop talking in circles. You can't make them see your point right away. But you can decide how much of yourself you give in that moment. You can decide whether you meet them with calm or with chaos. That choice is what keeps you from feeling completely drained every time a difficult interaction happens. The danger of shutting down is that it communicates disconnection, even if that's not your intention. The other person might feel ignored or dismissed, which can lead to even more conflict. Protecting your energy keeps you engaged enough to show that you care, while still holding a line that says, I matter here too. Over time, that balance helps you stay emotionally available without burning out. It's not always easy, especially if you're used to either giving too much or cutting off completely. But the more you practice it, the more you realize that your energy is your responsibility. And when you protect it with intention, you show up to your relationships not just more rested, but more genuine. Because you're not pouring from emptiness. You're speaking, listening, and loving from a place that still has something to give. We're taught from a young age that communication is the key to solving problems, and that's true. But what we're not taught is that sometimes the most powerful communication isn't about saying more, it's about knowing when to say less. In the middle of tension, our instinct is to explain, justify, clarify, and fill every silence with words that will make the other person understand. But when emotions are high, more words often mean more opportunities to be misunderstood. The harder you push your point, the more likely it is to get lost in the noise of the moment. Saying less doesn't mean withholding your truth. It means delivering it in a way that gives it the best chance to be heard. The strength of saying less starts with self-control. In a heated conversation, your mind races ahead, lining up points and counterpoints like a chess match. You want to make sure they know every reason why you're right and every example that proves it. But here's the hard truth. When someone is already defensive, piling on more words doesn't soften them, it hardens them. They stop listening to what you're saying and start preparing their own comeback. That's when your words stop being a bridge and start being a wall. Think about the times you've walked away from a conversation feeling like you said too much. Maybe you shared more than you intended in frustration, or you brought up something from the past that didn't need to be there. In hindsight, you realize that a shorter, calmer response would have left less to clean up. That's the power of restraint. When you say less, you give the other person room to process instead of overwhelming them with information or emotion they can't absorb in the moment. Saying less doesn't mean staying silent forever. It means recognizing the right amount for right now. It might be as simple as saying, I hear you, and I want to think about this before I respond. It might mean ending a sentence where you normally would have added 3 more explanations. This kind of brevity isn't cold, it's intentional. It shows that you value the conversation enough to protect it from spiraling. It also takes confidence to let your words breathe. Silence can feel uncomfortable, like you're losing ground, but sometimes that pause is exactly what lets the other person lower their guard. It signals that you're not here to overpower them. You're here to connect. And connection isn't built through sheer volume. It's built through clarity, respect, and timing. Over time, you start to see that the strength of saying less is really about trust, trusting yourself to be understood without over-explaining, and trusting the relationship to handle a conversation that unfolds slowly instead of all at once. You leave space for listening, for reflection, and for the possibility that the other person will meet you halfway. And in that space, your words carry more weight because they're not lost in the noise. They stand on their own, steady, clear, and strong enough to make the impact you intended. Defensiveness is a natural reflex. The moment we feel accused, misunderstood, or cornered, our brain wants to protect us. Words start coming out fast, explanations, justifications, and sometimes counterattacks, all in the name of making sure the other person knows we're not the bad guy. But here's what often happens. Instead of clearing the air, defensiveness fogs it up even more. The other person doesn't hear your heart, they hear your resistance. And suddenly, it's not about solving the problem anymore. It's about battling over who's right. That's where silence can be more powerful than any argument you could make. Silence in these moments isn't about giving the cold shoulder. It's not shutting down or walking away in anger. It's choosing not to add more noise when the conversation is already too loud. Think about the last time you reacted defensively. Maybe you interrupted them mid-sentence to correct a detail, or you raised your voice just enough to make sure you were heard. Even if what you said was true, the timing drowned out the truth. The strength of silence is that it removes the fuel from that fire. It creates space for emotions to cool so that your message, when you do speak, can actually land. This kind of silence takes discipline because everything in you will want to jump in and set the record straight. But sometimes, in the heat of the moment, the other person isn't even asking for the facts. They're asking to feel heard, and the fastest way to let someone feel heard is to stop talking long enough for them to finish. That pause communicates something that defensiveness never will. I'm listening. I'm not here to fight you. It's also worth noticing what silence does inside of you. When you choose it, you give yourself a few extra seconds to process instead of react. In those seconds, you can ask yourself, what's my goal here? Do I want to win this moment, or do I want to win the relationship? That shift in perspective can be the difference between a conversation that escalates and one that actually builds trust. Silence doesn't mean you never address the issue. It means you pick your moment carefully. After the other person has had their say, after the tone has softened, that's when you can share your perspective calmly, clearly, and without the edge that defensiveness brings. And because you didn't fight them for airtime, they're more likely to listen when it's your turn. Over time, choosing silence over defensiveness changes the way people experience you. They stop expecting an argument every time they bring up something hard. They feel safer opening up because they know you won't meet them with immediate pushback. And for you, it becomes a habit that protects your peace while also protecting the relationship. When silence speaks louder than defensiveness, it says, I'm strong enough not to be rattled. I care enough to listen before I respond. That's a statement no amount of fast talking can make, and it's one that can turn conflict into connection without a single extra word. Chaos in a conversation doesn't always look like yelling or slamming doors. Sometimes it's the confusion, the talking over each other, the back and forth that circles the same problem without ever landing on a solution. You can feel the tension in your chest, the frustration in your voice, and the exhaustion in your mind because you know, deep down, you're not getting anywhere. When emotions are running high, clarity often feels like the last thing on the table, and yet, it's the one thing that can actually move you forward. Choosing clarity over chaos isn't about controlling the other person's reaction. It's about anchoring yourself so that the conversation has a chance to go somewhere healthy. When chaos starts to build, it's easy to match the energy in the room. If they get louder, you get louder. If they throw in sharp comments, you sharpen yours right back. And in that moment, your focus shifts from understanding each other to just trying to win the exchange. But here's the problem. Chaos feeds itself. Every rushed word, every defensive jab, every half-interrupted sentence keeps the cycle spinning. Choosing clarity means stepping outside of that loop and asking yourself, what do I actually want to communicate here? It's slowing your pace when everything around you feels sped up. Clarity starts with intention. Before you dive into another round of back and forth, take a breath and get clear in your own mind about the point you're trying to make. That might mean letting go of the urge to bring up 3 other side issues. It might mean resisting the temptation to respond to every little thing they just said. Instead, you focus on one thing at a time. This isn't about oversimplifying the problem. It's about giving each part of it a real chance to be heard without it getting buried under the noise. It also means listening in a way that cuts through the chaos. That doesn't mean you agree with everything they're saying. It means you give yourself enough space to actually understand their perspective before deciding how to respond. Sometimes repeating back what you heard in your own words can slow the conversation down and create a moment of connection. So what I'm hearing can be a bridge in the middle of a storm. Choosing clarity over chaos also takes humility. You have to be willing to admit when you've lost the thread, when you need to slow down, or when the conversation needs a pause. That pause isn't weakness, it's maintenance. It's you saying, I value this too much to let it get drowned in confusion. Over time, this choice changes the way conflicts play out. You stop leaving conversations feeling drained and start leaving them with a clearer sense of where you both stand. Even if you don't agree yet, you build a habit of speaking in a way that's grounded and measured, not rushed and reactive. And the more you do it, the more you realize that clarity doesn't just reduce chaos, it makes room for understanding, and understanding is where real resolution begins. There's a common belief that the only way to be heard is to get louder. When someone's not listening or they're dismissing your point, it feels natural to push harder, to raise your voice so it cuts through. But here's the thing, volume doesn't guarantee impact. In fact, the louder you get, the easier it is for your message to get lost in the noise. People stop hearing your words and start reacting to your tone. Holding your ground without raising your voice is about learning that strength isn't in how forceful you can be, but in how steady you can stay. In moments of conflict, your nervous system wants to match the energy in the room. If they get intense, you feel your own heart rate climb, your shoulders tense, and your instinct is to meet them at their level. But when both people are operating at high volume, whether that's literally loud or just emotionally charged, clarity disappears. The conversation stops being about the issue and starts being about who can overpower the other. Holding your ground means resisting that pull. It's staying rooted in your point, your boundaries, and your values without letting the other person's tone decide yours. One of the most powerful tools you have in those moments is your pace. When you slow your speech and keep your tone even, you're sending a signal, not just to them, but to yourself, that you're in control of how you show up. You're not being passive, you're being intentional. That steady delivery forces the other person to engage with your words rather than just your energy. It also keeps you from saying things in the heat of the moment that you'll wish you could take back later. Holding your ground quietly doesn't mean you're letting things slide. It means you're communicating with precision. Instead of throwing 10 points at them all at once, you focus on one or two key truths and you say them clearly. You can even repeat them if needed without changing your tone. I understand you see it differently, but this is where I stand. I'm not okay with that. Simple, direct, and firm. You're showing that your boundaries aren't up for debate, but you're also showing respect for the conversation itself. It also helps to separate their emotion from your responsibility. If they're upset, that's theirs to process. You can acknowledge it without absorbing it. I hear you're frustrated, or I get that you're passionate about this. Lets them feel seen without you losing your footing. You're staying engaged without getting pulled into their emotional current. Over time, this way of communicating builds trust, not just with them, but with yourself. You start to believe that you can handle conflict without exploding or shutting down. You prove to yourself that you can be firm and calm at the same time. And when you carry that steadiness into difficult conversations, you often find the other person matching your energy instead of the other way around. Because calm can be just as contagious as chaos. And when you lead with it, you show that real authority doesn't have to shout to be heard. When we argue, most of us aren't just trying to be understood. We're trying to win. And winning feels good in the moment because it means you've proven your point, you've defended yourself, you've walked away feeling like you had the last word. But in relationships, winning almost always comes at a cost. You might get the victory, but you lose connection. You might be right, but the other person feels unheard or small. And when that happens enough times, the relationship stops feeling like a safe place and starts feeling like a battlefield. The need to win comes from a place most of us don't talk about: fear. Fear of being dismissed, fear of being wrong, fear of being taken advantage of. So we push harder, argue longer, or dig our heels in just so we don't feel like we've lost something. But in reality, every time we fight to win, we risk losing something much bigger: trust, respect, and emotional safety. The truth is, the people who care about you aren't keeping score. They're trying to figure out if you still value them when you disagree. Letting go of the need to win isn't about surrendering your beliefs or pretending you agree. It's about shifting your goal. In a healthy conversation, the goal isn't me over you. The goal is us together, even if we see it differently. When you stop aiming for victory, you free yourself from that tight, tense energy that keeps you locked in defense mode. You start to listen differently. You're not just waiting for your turn to counter, you're actually hearing them, and sometimes that changes the whole direction of the conversation. One of the most disarming things you can do in a heated discussion is to say, "You might be right about that," or "I can see how you'd feel that way." Those words aren't weakness, they're proof you're confident enough to hold space for another perspective. You're showing that your value isn't tied to being the loudest or the smartest person in the room. And the crazy thing is, when you do this, the other person often softens. They're less defensive, more open, because you've taken the competition out of it. Sometimes the most powerful move is to step back and let the conversation breathe. You don't have to solve it in one sitting. You don't have to have the perfect comeback. Giving space doesn't mean the issue disappears. It means you're choosing not to fuel it with more fire in the moment. That pause can be the difference between a fight that spirals and a conversation that eventually finds its way to resolution. When you let go of winning, you win something far more valuable: peace. You start to protect the relationship instead of just protecting your pride. You start to measure success, not by who came out on top, but by whether you both walked away feeling respected. That's the kind of win that lasts. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to stand over someone in victory. It's to stand next to them, still connected, even when you don't see eye to eye.